You know, the title's so long, I'm just going to refer to this as the film or that cheerleader thing. Made in 1993 as a made-for-TV movie and based on a true story with the actual events having been ramped up with a melodramatic overtone, this film is certainly one of the more interesting pieces I've stumbled across. It was directed by Michael Richie and written by Jane Anderson. Richie's probably best known as the man behind such comedies as both of the Fletch movies and the Bad News Bears. He also rather bizarrely wrote a basic storyline for the movie Cool Runnings, so we're dealing with a certain pedigree here. This isn't just some 2-bit director. Complementing Richie is Anderson, who's probably best known for her contributions to television as a writer, penning several episodes of The Wonder Years, Mad Men, and The Facts of Life. So with that in mind, it would seem that we have a reasonably competent director and set of scriptwriters on our hands. And I really wasn't disappointed. The film is based on an actual real-life happening from the early 90s, and follows the events of Wanda Holloway, a woman who was absolutely obsessed with her daughter making the cheerleading team. So much so that when her daughter was disqualified from the shortlist, Wanda snapped and tried to hire a hitman to pick off the other cheerleaders, or their mothers, as an act of revenge. Now thankfully, Holloway was arrested before any harm was committed, and to illustrate the full narrative of events, this film plays around with the timeline, jumping back and forth between the events as they happened and to footage of a mock studio interview in which Holly Hunter as Wanda tries to put her side of the story across. Right away, the first thing that I can say about this film is that it's totally quirky. It has a real eccentric element to it that's absolutely wonderfully bizarre to see. In fact, I'm kind of struggling to think of any comparison in terms of style and content that would be in line with this kind of film. The closest I can think of is that it reminds me a little bit of a mild trauma film that never quite gets to the crazy part. Or maybe like a latter-day John Waters picture, something like Crybaby or Hairspray, but without the musical elements. The zaniness it puts out there sharply contrasts with the fact that this was an actual event that actually happened, and that there were people that very nearly died as a result of all of this. It's pretty much that way for about 2/3 of the movie. The story basically takes the real-life events and just ramps them up and chucks in a bit of sensationalism for good measure. And for a TV movie, I think that really plays to its strength. In short, I wouldn't take this as a factual account of what happened, but at the same time, do keep reminding yourself throughout that an approximation of this actually happened.
Make my own choices and...
You know who I'd like to see dead?
Who?
Francine Rich.
She's a slut.
She's no slut, she's a tight ass. Oh, excuse me, Mrs. Holloway.
Oh, don't worry about it. Mom don't care about bad language.
Oh, you think so, do you?
Yeah. You're real progressive. So how'd you do it if you could?
Francine?
Tight ass slut. Shanna.
Well, let's see, I guess I would, sneak into her car at school and loosen the bolt on her drive shaft.
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah.
You know who I'd like to see dead? Verna Heath.
Oh, yeah?
How would you do it, Pete?
I know. I'd take some explosives and put it in a baton so that if she dropped it, bam.
That's not practical, Shane. How would you do it, Pete?
Oh, I don't know. I guess I'd have to think about it, I guess.
You know, everyone at some point in their lives has said, you know, oh, I am so mad at so-and-so, I could just kill him, okay? You know, you probably, but, you know, I say something like that and everybody starts coming out of the woodwork. Oh, yeah. You know what Wanda once said to me? Huh? Well, you wouldn't believe what she said to me once. You know, give me a break.
Where it did all go a bit off the rails for me personally is the third act, when Wanda's finally caught. This film absolutely grinds to a screeching halt, and instead of the unusual over-the-top energy that's been the centre of this film from the opening minutes, we instead get a closing 20 to 30 minutes that's largely serious courtroom scenes, followed by sequences of people who were close to Wanda trying to use underhanded tricks to make a profit off her story. And while you'd think it'd be interesting, in all honesty you could probably lop 15 minutes off the end of this film and you really wouldn't miss anything. In fact, I'd argue that by taking 15 minutes off the end of this film, you'd probably tremendously benefit it. The cast are for the most part pretty good and really do keep that high energy pace up and running for the majority of the runtime of the film. In particular, Holly Hunter, who's probably best known as Elastigirl from The Incredibles, is almost otherworldly as Wanda. She's absolutely razor sharp and really gives quite an astounding performance as both a bit crazy and particularly nasty when she wants to be. Swoosie Kurtz is also astounding as Beau Bridges' mentally unwell wife, Maria Harper. And she properly gets into the performance throughout. There are two types of character really in this film. There's the relaxed, mellow, sort of cheery character, or a totally off-the-wall, 40 million words a second eccentric bombasticism. There's no room for a middle ground here. Also, I feel I must mention the delivery of the dialogue throughout this film is simply wonderful. Everyone has a drawl and everyone speaks very, very quickly, and to hear that fluid and well-written dialogue be presented here was really quite wonderful. The direction of this production is really nice and very well handled. It's a treat to see how the cast have been positioned and told to play their parts, particularly in the grander wide shots where multiple characters are doing their own thing as individuals, while at the same time acting as a collective to really flesh out the scenes. It has a sense of intricacy, because everyone in the frame is doing their own individual character's thing. No one's just standing around, and there's very rarely just nothing happening on screen. Going hand in hand with the direction, the cinematography is again equally pretty good. It's not particularly original, but it's consistent. It uses a pretty decent variety and plays around with composition to get the best results. One of the things that I really warmed to with this film, and it is very subtle, is the fact that for the flashback sequences which tell the events, they shot on film, whereas the studio sections, where the interviews are taking place in the present, are shot on studio videotape. Little things like that really make a big difference in swaying audience emotions subliminally, and the fact that something so subtle as that was a decision that was made really shows an attention to detail, I feel. The editing's also quite sharp, and while they run with the aforementioned back and forth in time, semi-cyclical narrative, which is quite cool, the cuts throughout the film itself are very consistent. They only cut when they need to, and there isn't any needless shots padding the production out. It's a good, solid effort. One of the more unusual things about this film is the soundtrack. Considering the film's topic, which, again, I remind you, is about a woman arranging to have someone killed because her daughter wasn't picked to be a cheerleader. You'd think they'd maybe pick something a bit semi-serious to match the film's themes. However, it's actually quite the opposite here. To match the eccentric and sometimes silly performances, the soundtrack is an often upbeat, fast-moving country piece, also mainly acoustic. which again only adds to the very unusual texture that this film has. The positively true adventures of the alleged Texas cheerleader-murdering mum was released on DVD by Prism Leisure in September 2002. It's currently dirt cheap online, and the DVD release has no extras. The print itself was pretty clean and decent enough for viewing, I'd say. One of the more unusual things I've ever spotted on this DVD, however, was the film's opening, which for this actually contains the original lead-in continuity for the TV movie from HBO itself. Which, I mean, it's just nice. It's just very unusual. Then again, I suppose if they could use it, it would seem odd to segregate it away as the only extra on the disc and nothing else. Either way, it's a really nice touch, and it makes me wonder why more films don't include TV continuity, as it'd really help add a sense of periodic context. This is such a tonally weird film. I'm not exactly sure whether what I watched was a brilliant lampooning of the absurdity of the situation, or a cheap attempt at sensationalising what's clearly multiple cases of mental health problems. Its over-the-topness coupled with excellent direction, solid cinematography and editing definitely work in its favour. But the totally odd and at times inappropriate soundtrack, coupled with the slow and plodding third act, quite literally shuts this film down. It really works against it on so many levels. This was one of two films that was released immediately after the first trial had concluded, but immediately before the retrials began. Wanda would be sentenced to 10 years, serve 6 months, and then spend the rest of her time on a suspended sentence with community service. And apparently, as of 2016, her daughter isn't that fussed about cheerleading anymore. So, you know, good times. It just baffles me that someone didn't think that this kind of film might be a bit insensitive. But I suppose it's a case of hindsight on my part. The film is what it is, and it was rather successful for the time. It's just a shame about the moral implications. It's hardly the greatest film ever made, but if you're looking for something a bit unusual tonally, I'd definitely say check this one out.